We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, Say Something.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a guest. I have a repeat guest this week. Before I get to her, however, I do want to mention our sponsor, Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. And so if you are an attorney or title company, or you know an attorney or title company that needs to renew its professional liability insurance, also called malpractice insurance, contact Sam. He is fantastic at what he does. We really appreciate him supporting the show. And a great way for you to support the show is to support our sponsor. So I know that Sam can write insurance anywhere in the country, but he's focused on Florida and Texas in particular right now. And you can reach him at sam@attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com. So with that, this week's guest, again, like I said, is a repeat guest. I won't spend really a lot of time on her introduction. You can read that, hear that if you go back and listen to episode 117, which was physical and mental coaching. But my guest this week is a brand new author who's got a best-selling book on Amazon, and she is a friend of mine. She is a referral partner of mine. So welcome back to the show, Marleta Black. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
So I was fortunate enough to get a copy of Say Something, your new book. But what I'd like you to do really quick at the beginning here is just describe a little bit about the book. And then I've read it. I thought it was great. And we'll get into some specific questions. But just sort of the 50,000-foot overview. Why did you write the book?
So the high-flying view is I found myself in couples counseling sessions, therapy sessions that had to do with communication, and almost all problems originate from communication difficulties. I found myself repeating the same kind of observations, the same kind of noticing the same kind of what I call transactionalism between people, right? Transactionalism because of past wounds in a relationship, or past, let's call them letdowns, letting someone down, or having an expectation not be met. And so the transactionalism comes in, and inevitably I would find myself in front of those people saying, well, did you ask them? Did you say something, essentially? And the answer is either no, or I thought I did, or I tried, or I did, but they're not listening. And so then I move more in depth into the very close-up view of putting very fine words on a confrontation. And that creeps into all kinds of topics. Sex, money, raising kids, everything. Transactionalism creeps into everything. So that's why. That's my big why.
Yeah, and I got that message from the book, and that even, we're here on the Crushing Debt Podcast, and we're going to get into money and mindset and how the book translates to some of that stuff. But what I enjoyed the book. What I loved about it, one of the things I loved about it was, and short chapters, but really packed with content and then the action item after every chapter, and then the space to sort of think and contemplate, and okay, what did that chapter say? What was the action item out of that chapter? What should I do? And often, even though, we're going to talk a little bit about how this translates to money, I even read the book thinking to myself, I need to put some of this stuff in place with my wife. I need to put some of this stuff in place with my kids. I need to put some of this stuff in place with my office staff, and how it just translated beyond all that stuff. So, I really enjoyed the book. And a lot of times when you think, no, I told you that, but did you really? And were you
Yes.
really listening to what the other person had to say? And
100%. Yes.
and how do you communicate? So why don't we get into? I mean, it is the Crushing Debt podcast, and at first glance, maybe the book doesn't have a lot to do with money, but it actually does have a lot to do with money if you read it from that angle. So maybe we can talk a little bit about, creating your vision and having your values and how that translates to growth and how that translates to money and your mindset around money.
Yeah. So I have very distinct chapters about core values and vision, and we can think we have a vision that's very romantic at the beginning, how we come together as a couple or how we come together as business partners even. It's often an intoxicating story of coming together, like the romantic nature of that. And we can believe that we have a vision, and maybe we actually had a very clear vision at the beginning. But what I know in my own experience, what I know in coaching small business partnerships and marriages, is that vision can get what I call dusty, where you stuck it on a shelf and put it on display and talked about that original story. But it can get dusty. We need to take it off and dust it and get it out and talk about it again and again. And that's true in marriages as much as businesses. And we don't do that. We make assumptions that, well, you said you wanted this 20 years ago, or you said you wanted this even last year, and we change and we don't talk about it. So I'm a big believer, you ought to be able to tell me your 5 to 7 core values as an individual. And you ought to be able to tell me in a couples counseling session what your 5 to 7 core values as a couple in a family are. And I'm a big advocate of that, putting that on the wall with art and making that a big deal, and teaching it to your kids. This is what our family stands for, right?
Right.
And I find when we get off track, I literally am presenting the mismatch of values, core values, to two people that I'm, mediating for lack of a better word. And it's often that their lists aren't compatible enough. They could be if there was more conversation. So it's not an all or nothing deal, right?
Yeah, and I think that applies to vision as well. And I've had the conversation with my wife years ago. It's probably time to bring it up again in terms of here's my vision. But not only my vision for where I want to be personally, and then I have to, like you said, dust that off and look at that at least every year, if not probably more than that. But then where's our vision as a family? Where and how do those two, like you said, even with values, how do those two interact? How does my vision for myself fit into my vision for my family, and how does her vision for herself fit into her vision of our family? And that, what was interesting to me is the way that you wrote the book was sort of like we're going on a journey. And I know it was a metaphor for going on this personal growth journey, but also the way that you wrote it was actually physically going on a journey. What do we need to pack? What do we need to be prepared for? What does our GPS say? All that kind of stuff. So I thought that was an interesting angle for the way that the book was written in terms of going on this journey yourself, with your family, with your business partners, with, whomever.
I wanted to kind of make it lighthearted, right? So the analogy is a tool for thinking of something very simple as a hike, and even a basic 1-hour hike, you need to be prepared. But, it's more in the analogy of a big expedition. You need some stuff with you. You need some safety. You need some ways to have each other's back that needs to be discussed, And one of the examples is, if your partner, sprains their ankle, guess what? If you're in the middle of the Oregon Trail, you're responsible for getting each other home. You can't just say, well, I'll see you at the end. Examples with family vision, like I'm a big believer that men have vision for their families, and women do too. Women have vision for their individual children, very deep vision for each individual child. But men have this kind of gift of this family vision and the family direction. And I think that's the way we were generally made. And I think, sometimes men are not appreciative for that vision. I've had examples in families where you get to where your kids are college age and one doesn't want to go to college. And you have this mismatch of, one parent saying, well, they're going. And the other one saying, well, they don't have to if they don't want to. They could do something else. And so talking about all those things, what do we expect?
Well, we're even finding that now in my own family. So both kids, as we record this, my oldest son is 10, my youngest is 7. And I was coaching both of them in soccer, and my older son really took to it to the point that now he's on a competitive travel soccer club, and so we're going all around Tampa Bay playing other teams and taking him to the practices and doing all that stuff. And we feel bad because we look at the younger son and, what do you want to do? Do you want to play soccer? Do you want to play baseball? Do you want to play football? Do you want to play sports? Do you want to, and what we're starting to notice now is that I've been playing drums since I was 10. And so I've got drums and drumsticks and all this stuff laying around the house. And my younger son is now starting to pick up the drumsticks and noodle around with them and play with them and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so now we're starting to have this, okay, well, let's foster. The older one is wanting to go the sports route, the athletics route, the soccer and flag football and all this other stuff, where the younger one seems to be getting more into music and other stuff. So, we're having to talk about, do we want to put him in karate? Do we want to put him in music? Do we want to put him get him lessons? Do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? So even not only college, but even at the level of where they are now, what do you want to do? What sports do you want to play? What instruments do you want to play? Do you want to get into art? Do you want to get into, Boy Scouts? What is it that you want to do? And we're having to talk about that, as a family, with my wife, with the boys, doing all that stuff. So it even, I think it translates, that one of the things I love about the book, I think it translates to all levels, to all situations. So
I tried very hard to make it about all communication, not just couples. I allude to it a little more loosely, but it is a book for all one-on-one dialogue. Really, because we can miss the finer points by making both positive and negative assumptions in our daily passing conversation.
Right.
And so the point of the book is to do a little bit of that homework after each short chapter. I wanted short chapters because my attention span is not beyond 2 or 3 pages at once. I'm an audiobook kind of person, and so reading something big and heavy is just not my thing. I can name several books I get halfway through for that reason. I really wanted something that was interactive and short, digestible pieces. And then real, here's some words to try kind of value. Because in my work in coaching, I literally find myself suggesting an opening line or a segue. And that is the majority of my work, is that, and that open door. And I find once they go through the door, it becomes so much easier. So,
well, and I think even from my perspective, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum from you in terms of I paused one book to read yours, but I'm in the middle of a book it's The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is nearly 600 pages.
Wow.
And I can sit and just,
push through it. Yeah.
I can, I'll
My
sit.
dad is like that. My dad can literally read a book in 3 days.
Yeah.
Cover to cover, just this thick.
But even I enjoyed that's one of the things I enjoyed about yours is the time to sit and reflect and do the homework and honestly, I didn't do every single chapter, but I read every single chapter. I just didn't do the homework after every single chapter.
It's designed to be like a buffet, right?
Right.
I wanted you to be able to go to the buffet walk every line in the buffet, like read the book straight through all the way to the end, do no homework at all. And then go back and go, okay, I must revisit chapter 27, which whatever that chapter is. Go back and revisit the conversations where you go, oh, that one hits home,
Right.
So very similar concept, but I wanted to be fun. I wanted, I wanted the title and subtitle to draw both men and women in, people of all walks of life, no matter what the conversation centerpiece is.
Yeah, and I think it does. And so one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about, one of the things you talk about in the book is this concept of hiding things versus transparency. And I think that may be, one of the things that I kept thinking when I was reading the book in terms of how to translate it to something that would fit well with the content of this show is one of the biggest issues, one of the things that cause money problems is communication problems within relationships. And so I think it's important to talk about this concept of being transparent versus hiding things. And I think a lot of people, especially that I deal with, there's plenty of times where I'll deal with spouses and one of them will pull me aside and say, listen, here's what's going on financially, but I never had the courage to talk about it with my spouse. So I don't know if you can talk about that for a little bit.
Right. So this idea of shame around money, how we spend money, how we reward ourselves with money, how we get even with money, that all comes into our spending habits. So if you kind of evaluate your budget and your spending habits, budget is a key factor of your debt reduction strategies, right? So you can't look at a real honest budget without really looking at 12 months of transactions or a good period of time where you're looking and evaluating transactions. I find couples will come to me, individuals will come to me in a couple situation or a business partner situation and say, look, don't tell so-and-so, but I bought this the other day. I don't want them to know. So that literally hiding big purchases, but also hiding small purchase, but highly frequent, repetitive habits. Even sneaking off to get, and not that there's anything wrong with this, sneaking off to get a Starbucks every day can be part of a partnership agreement where we say, okay, we're not buying coffee out anymore. We're making coffee at home. We got the machine. Right. and you'll still see this transactionalism coming out. And so I'm an advocate of no matter how small the issue, whether it's a cup of coffee a day versus, I'm channeling money to this big thing and I'm not telling my business partner or my life partner. I'm an advocate of all things being equal in terms of getting it out, getting it discussed, because the underlying factor of that transaction is much bigger. The shame involved or the empowerment involved in the purchase, whatever the case may be, the anger involved sometimes in the purchase is evident if you dig a little deeper.
Well, and the flip side of that coin, I talked to a lady this past week, and it was a mortgage foreclosure scenario, and she said, I got served with this foreclosure. I had no idea my husband wasn't paying the mortgage. And part of me thought, how do you not, and again, not from a criticism perspective, but how would you not know? I mean, if I wasn't paying the mortgage, my wife would see the bank balance getting bigger every month, or my wife would see that I was spending it on other stuff other than the mortgage. And I get it. Maybe they have separate bank accounts or maybe there is. And that's what I straight up asked her. Is there anything else going on? Is there another person? Is there a gambling addiction? Is there a drug or alcohol addiction? Do you know? Is there something else going on that he's spending this money? And no, she didn't know, and I don't think so, and I don't know. But chances are, once we clean up this foreclosure scenario, if they don't learn to communicate, they're probably heading towards a divorce.
Yeah, and you know what? More oftentimes, it's not a third party or an affair. More oftentimes, it's a repeating pattern from childhood of parental to child empowerment. And so adults walking around in adult bodies are playing out the hiding behaviors that they participated in as children or as teens, especially if there wasn't a lot of permission given to have children learn to be accountable with money early and learn that if they misappropriate money, that they have to actually experience the consequences of those choices. And so, some families teach that stuff and some families don't. I see families where the money is just handed to the children and there's no real awareness of where money comes from. And I see others where it's very punitive and money's used as a way to bond us and keep us talking.
Yeah.
That's a terrible way to use money. It's just not good. And this happens into young adulthood, parents of young adult children, they're trying to keep the young adults in their lives by saying, well, I'm paying for this and I'm paying for that, so come to the family gathering. That's just not the right way to use money. It's just not the right way. So
I've told this story before, I think on the show, maybe hundreds of episodes ago, but yeah. I remember when I went away to college, my dad gave me a credit card and he said, listen, I'll pay off this credit card every month, but you can only use it for emergencies. And so I would call him and, hey, Dad, I just had my, 8th bag of ramen noodles. Can I please use my emergency card and go to the grocery store? And of course, yeah, I go to the grocery store. And I go to the grocery store, back in when I was in college, buy, $20, $30, which would last me for a couple of weeks, and he would pay it off. Then my sister went away to college and he did the same thing. He gave her a credit card and said, I'll pay this off every month, but you can only use it for emergencies. And I remember she would call him and I have to go to this party tonight. It's an emergency. I need a new pair of jeans. And like, that's not an emergency. But, she has my dad wrapped around her little finger anyway. So of course he did it. But that, and even with, my own son and my own boys. So my older son just celebrated his 10th birthday a couple weeks ago and got a bunch of gift cards from Target for his birthday, had like $50 in gift cards. And so we took him to Target and, what do you want? You got $50, go for it. And we get to the Lego aisle and he is obsessed right now with Star Wars Legos. I have so many Star Wars Lego kits in my house. It's unbelievable. But he found on the shelf just a generic, just generic, different color box of Legos. And no kit, nothing that it would particularly build, just, whatever, red, blue, yellow, green, whatever, Legos. And he said, I want to buy this. And I said, well, we've got so many Legos at home that you've taken apart that we could never find all the Legos to put them back together again. You've probably got all of these pieces in a box somewhere in the house. Mm-hmm. And so I said, it's your money. Buy what you want, but are you going to be happy with this purchase when you get home? And he ended up buying something else, a little handheld video game toy, something or other that he now loves. He brings it everywhere with him. So I get your point of my dad taught me about money pretty early, and I'm trying to teach my boys about money, and it's having those
right there is your vision question, right? Teaching him that there's potentially a greater potential choice out there in terms of life choices. Toy choices are the beginning of it with children. So they only know toys in the beginning, but that soon expands into subject selection at school and college selection and life partner selection. And so understanding the idea of your vision, helping guide you to know that you have many choices, and not to settle, not to settle and not to just drift into things because it was there, and you didn't actually talk about what you desire, right?
So the other reason I like having the show is because it's nice to know every once in a while, even if accidentally, I get something right.
Yeah. So. Listen, this is all so normal. Which is why I love my work. I love making people aware of how normal they are, and how if they are carrying any kind of labels of judgment about themselves, to let that go and to really just open up the dialogue and let go of the shame if there is any. Let go of the judgments, period, and let's talk about it.
And that's another big piece of what I do, of what the show is about. I have so many people that come to me that say, I'm up to debt in my up to my eyeballs. I don't see the way out of it, but I borrowed the money and I feel morally obligated to pay it back. And that's probably one of the biggest mental issues that I deal with, and probably one of the biggest hurdles that I deal with in getting the clients to understand that, look, I get it. And if you borrowed the money, I want you to be able to pay it back, and I want to support you in that. But at the end of the day, I have to take care of you. And, Visa's not going to go out of business if they don't get your 10 grand, or 20 grand. So it's okay, like you said, to let go of that label, to let go of that guilt and do what's best for you and your family. And I think a big way is by talking about it. If you want to talk to me about it from a debt issue, or if you want to talk to your family about it, or friends, or call you, or something like that.
Yeah, resource people, period. I think you and I are both people that have resource people in our lives. And, I'm a big advocate of steering my clients back to those resource people. Have a conversation, talk about what the options are. Open up the world of option.
Right.
And get it discussed.
I used to say a while back, one of the memory hooks that I have for the law firm is there's always options. And
yeah.
I can typically at least come up with 2, if not more than that, for almost any scenario, whether it be debt related or legal related or anything. So thank you. I really appreciate you being a repeat guest on the show. Is there anything that we missed, or anything that you wanted to say in particular?
No, I think, as I encourage people to look at the book, there's something in it for everyone. There are literally 58 chapters, small chapters that are easily applied to several situations in your life. And so there is something in it for everyone. I'm really advocating for parents who are nearing empty nest or have passed through empty nest, which is a dialogue in and of itself. Let me tell you, I've been through that. That is something of a conversation to renegotiate your life after empty nest. But in particular, to actually parent your young adult children. I'm dealing with a lot of parents parenting young adult children and not sure how to kind of gradually cut those money ties and gradually cut those parental directive ties and be more of a consultant in their life. And so it's a great book for young adults as well. But there's something in it for everyone is my last word.
Yeah, I certainly got a lot out of it. I appreciate it. So again, it's called Say Something: The Adventure of Finding the Right Words to Express Your Desires, Reduce Drama, and Create Connection. It is available on Amazon. For those of you that want to grab a copy, I will put a link in the notes so you can just click on it to the Amazon site to get the book. Fantastic book. Congratulations on getting the book done. And thank you again for being a repeat guest on the show.
It's a pleasure to be on this show in particular. Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, again, I would encourage you all, search for Marleta Black, search for Say Something. Again, I'll put the link on there. But I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the podcast. So, like I like to say at the end of every episode, I hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. Certainly, Say Something is a great way to get on that track to do that by creating your relationships, by strengthening your relationships, by growing your relationships. So thank you again, Marleta. We really appreciate you being on this week's episode, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.